Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, also known as ETCG1 when I post videos to this channel. And today I have something special for you, something I've never done before. But before I get to that, hey, if it's your birthday, happy birthday. Please enjoy this digital confection that I found for you. What I'm going to do different today is I'm going to do a commentary to a video that I posted over on Eric the Car Guy. My most recent video was a time-lapse video. It was shot over a period of about a week and a half. So a lot of you had asked, how long did all this work take? Well, it took about a week and a half, and part of that was parts and some of the other stuff. And more than anything else, like running between my house and here in storage to pick up tools, because there's always one tool that I forgot. I mean, that's 20 minutes right there, at least, as far as the round trip goes. So there's all that involved. I'm going to stop the video at a couple of spots to explain a few more things, but these are the things that I did in this video. I replaced the timing belt water pump, all the oil seals on the front of the engine, the cam seals and the crank seal. I replaced the rear main seal. I replaced the clutch. I replaced the clutch hydraulics, both the master and slave cylinder. I installed, I think I said a rear main seal, oil pan gasket. I also took the exhaust off of my Integra Type R. The parts that I had installed onto my Type R were parts that I purchased used from somebody, and they were actually for a Del Sol. So I had to modify the exhaust a bit to get it to work on my Integra. But I'd worked all those bugs out and it was working fine. So what my son had done is he went out and purchased a new Skunk2 Alpha header and a Tanabe Medallion exhaust, which is now Revel, by the way, for the cat back part of it. I also had to purchase a separate catalytic converter, and I had to weld some pieces in to make all that work on the Type R. None of that was covered in this video though. But the reason why I took the stuff off of my car and put it onto my son's car is because the Type R is becoming more and more of a show car, and having cut and welded pieces of exhaust, well, that's not exactly show quality. My son wants to autocross and daily drive the GSR, so he doesn't care. He just wants some nice sounding exhaust, and he knew that exhaust on my Type R sounded good, so away we go. Anyway, I took the exhaust off of my Type R, put it on his car, and then I took the new exhaust and ended up putting it on the Type R. Additionally, I also replaced the taillight gaskets on the Integra, as well as I installed a limited slip differential, which you'll see in part of this video. And while taking everything apart, I found the outer CV boot on the left side was, well, it just popped right out of the cup. So I ended up replacing that with a part that I had sitting around in, well, this pile of stuff that I've got here. Been sitting there for at least 20 years. It was actually for an Acura Vigor. It was a little bit short, but the boot went on just fine, and it seems to seal up and it's not leaking anymore. So I'm happy with that. Anyway, I pretty much hit the reset button on this Integra. Why don't we get started with the video, and I'll get started with the commentary. All right, here we go. Now, the red valve cover that you see in the beginning was actually off of my Type R, which I replaced with a new one, but I use it to cover up an engine while I'm working, so dirt and stuff doesn't get down in there. So as you can see, I just laid it down there. Anyway, I just finished the valve adjustment, and now I'm going around and it looks like removing the radiator assembly, which makes, getting access to that header in the front a lot easier. In the back there, by the top of the intake, I just cleaned the idle air control valve. There's a screen on the inside of it, gets carbured up, a little bit of carburetor cleaner cleans it up, gives it a nice idle, that and a good valve adjustment. Let's see, I'm over on the other side now. It looks like, I think I'm messing with the oil pan gasket since I'm spending so much time underneath the vehicle, and that did take some time to replace, and mostly because, like I said, it hardened up and kind of sticky to the oil pan, and I had to chisel it off, which is not uncommon, especially on an older vehicle like this. Oh yeah, I drained the power steering system and moved that power steering pump out of the way. Yeah, I'm doing the timing belt now, so I've cut it and that's all that stuff. I got partway through the timing belt and found out that the cam seals didn't look all that great, so I ended up replacing those cam seals, and that took a couple of days to get those parts. And this is the part where I removed the transmission. I got a pretty good injury on my finger removing the transmission. I pinched my finger between the roll pin and the top of the car when I knocked the roll pin out and smashed that up pretty good. Got myself an interesting wound from that. And there's my son who's talking to me the whole time. Now this, installing the limited slip was a bit tricky. Now the limited slip itself wasn't that bad. It went right in. It was from M Factory, by the way, and I'll link all the parts and everything down in the description. The issues that I had were like getting the case to go back together, and also some rudimentary tool problems. This is where I'm taking the bearings off of the differential. I was actually able to save one. I got two bearings, but only one of them showed up, so I only ended up installing one new bearing and one old bearing. It didn't seem to be a problem in the end. And there, I just swapped the speedo gear over. Now that happened really quickly, but what happened with the speedo gear is I damaged it a little bit and it was causing a noise. And you'll see here in a minute when I go to install the differential that I'm messing with it a little bit and I'm trying to deal with that noise. Well, Those helical gears that are on the Speedo gear on the differential, like I said, got a little buggered up when I removed them. Again, I didn't want to drive all the way over to the shop and to the storage and get my puller to pull that thing apart. So I ended up chiseling it off, and I damaged the grooves when doing that. Anyway, I was able to file them out and get that noise to pretty much go away, but then I had a heck of a time getting the case to go back together. And the hint here, I'm actually doing the same thing to my Type R because the differential's worn out in that, is how to assemble it. I found that putting the bearing inside the case, the upper input shaft bearing, putting that inside the case and putting it together allowed it to go together so much easier, which I did, and I finally got that all squared away. And now I'm doing the clutch fork and the throwout bearing and everything else, and now it's going back in the car. And you like my leg lift of the transmission here that you're about to see in a minute? I put on there, so I torqued everything up, and then I get the transmission and I do a leg lift move. So I use my legs to push that up on there, and it worked okay. You know, those transmissions are awkward when you're laying on the ground and doing this, which, well, after this week I needed a few days to recover because laying on the cold ground was not a lot of fun. Anyway, transmission's back in it now, and I am also oh yeah, just replaced the fuel filter there. That's what I was doing on the firewall. That's something else got replaced. And this is where I'm going to pause the video, because if you look over to the left here, I've got a box, an air box, air intake box. So let's pause right there. Years ago, a friend of mine had a 98 Type R that he put a supercharger onto, and he also put a cold air intake onto it. He took the factory air box, which the Type R and other Integras differ because other Integras draw air from the engine compartment behind the ABS modulator. With the Type R, they closed off that opening and they draw the air from behind the fender, and I have no idea why they didn't do this to all the vehicles. It's not like it's hard. Seems like it would be less parts and that kind of thing. But anyway, they only did that on a Type R. Because my friend, he'd given me his original lower air box for a 98 Type R. I had that. So I just took that off and I put it on my son's car as a cold air intake. And it's a cold air intake where I don't have to worry about water ingestion or anything. It was factory made. So I know that it was all set up to be, you know, what it was supposed to be. So in essence, what I did was I converted his regular intake, which drew air from the engine compartment, into a cold air intake like the Type R. Now, there was still the hole up in the inside of the fender, which I just took a piece of sheet metal and cut a circle out, put some body sealer on it, and just basically glued it up into place, and that took care of that. And these photographs that you're looking at should show what I'm talking about a little more clearly. So in other words, I took the stock GSR intake and converted it over to a cold air intake, and you can't see that here because I was doing that all underneath, but I hope these photographs shed some light on that. Now let's start back up. Oh, I'm finishing up the timing belt. I got the cam seals at this point. So I'm just putting all those back together, putting the drive belts on, timing belt on, and then the drive belts. Now, because I moved the crankshaft around and the camshafts around so much, I had to mess around with it a little bit in order to get it back in time. But it wasn't that difficult. Normally when I do this, I have the cams and everything in place, and I just swap the belt on and off, and it's a lot quicker. But it's okay to take a little bit more time. But something I want to note right here with the valve cover off, see how clean that engine is down inside? I've been maintaining this thing since it was new. She was really good about her oil changes. It looks better than the inside of my Type R, and I'm proud of that. Ooh, and there comes the valve cover that I spent so much time on. The paint on the valve cover is actually VHT header paint. And for the letters, what I ended up doing was I cleaned them on the outside first. So in other words, I took a Roloc disc and I cleaned the letters before I ever took off, well, during the process of taking the paint off of the valve cover. Then after I'd finished that, I painted the valve cover after I cleaned all the stuff up. I painted the valve cover, and then I went back in with the Roloc discs and then did all the letters, and I think it turned out rather well. Now we're in the back of the car, and I forgot to tell you that I'm installing a process rear stabilizer bar and brace. That's the thing I forgot to talk about. So I did mess with the rear suspension as well as doing the exhaust, and it's a lot easier to do the rear suspension without the exhaust in the way, so that's why we're back here doing this. But the progress rear stabilizer bar for this is the same size as the Type R. It's the same diameter. The original diameter on the Type R stabilizer bar is kind of a joke, and you can do a lot to make these vehicles handle better by messing with the rear suspension. And that progress rear stabilizer bar that he put on did a really good job of that. I think my son made excellent choices in the parts that he chose for his car to upgrade it. Anyway, I only had one set of jack stands that would work, so I had to go to Harbor Freight, got myself another set of jack stands, which I'm just unpacking here, lifting up the Type R so that I can remove its exhaust and its taillights. I also replaced the taillight gaskets in it, which were glued into place, and I used a plastic razor blade to get all that stuff off of there, which worked really well. So it was able to scrape away all the stuff, but it didn't harm the finish at all. Anyway, the exhaust is coming off the Type R, going onto the GSR, and well, it worked out pretty well. And you can see that the engine compartment in the Type R is actually much nicer than you probably remember it. During my time off, that's one of the things I did. I went through and redid that whole thing and did a similar thing to the Type R that I did to the GSR. And now we're in the home stretch, filling up the transmission now that the axles and everything are back in. I think I'm putting oil in soon because, oh yeah, I'm putting on the exhaust header is what happened there, or what's happening there. And once that's on, I replaced the distributor O-ring, the VTEC solenoid O-ring. I had already replaced the cam plug with an aftermarket one that had O-rings on it, so that wasn't have to worry about a leak there. I marked the distributor before I removed it so I could put it back in the same place. I haven't checked the timing, but everything seems to function fine. But now, because it might have to transfer stuff. Maybe not. Give it a second to warm up. It's got to clear itself out. That engine started right up. It wanted to live. I just had him basically turn the key on to prime the fuel pump to fill up the empty fuel filter before starting it. Other than that, it would have just cranked and cranked and cranked. But as you heard, it started right up. He is absolutely in love with the car. The clip that I showed you at the end of him driving it is part of a 3-minute thing that he did. He took it out and he was just going over everything, the limited slip, the exhaust, all of it. Shortly after that, he drove it down to Import Alliance in Atlanta. We're in Cincinnati, so it was an 8-hour drive there and back. No issues. He did that with Honda Preservation. They both had a great time. I ended up staying in Cincinnati to finish the Type R and get that stuff done. That's the commentary. I hope that gives you a little more backstory, a little more information into what happened during that time lapse that I just showed you. I had fun doing this. If you like this, I could probably do this to more videos too. It was kind of fun doing it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching today. If you have automotive questions, air@thecarguy.com. Otherwise, you can follow me on social media, stuff like that. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time.